Most of the time, your equipment at work is awesome. But when it fails sometimes, you gotta be able to make it up as you go. So I was watching Hamilton, among many times this last few weeks. Saw the part where Jonathan Groff, as King George III, does his famous spitting. Now, he admits that he's a spitter, and if you ever do a lot of Broadway or musicals, spit happens. But one of the things they talked about in some of the behind the scenes is what they do with the microphones. How they've got a microphone set up in the crown, and they wear microphones, but sometimes when they're doing these parts, the microphones fail. It's bound to happen at various times, and there's different ways that they can address it. They maybe grab a handheld mic like they do with the rap battles. They maybe have somebody else's mic that they grab real quick. Or what happens sometimes is they just have to project really loud, like in the old days. There's a number of things that when technical and equipment failures happen, that they try to do to be able to work through it. And the same is true of working at a theme park with any of the jobs that I had. Some good examples at Busch Gardens. In driving those Land Rovers, we had a number of things we would have to deal with sometimes. One, we had fans that were up in the top of the Land Rover that were supposed to blow down on us and give us some cool air and make it more comfortable, and the fans didn't always work. Actually, they worked fewer times than they did work. So we had a lot of ways of trying to work around and keeping cool. The bigger issue that we would have on the Land Rovers is if our microphones cut out. We had microphones that we wore and plugged into the truck, and so it had a sound system. So that way people that were riding in the back of the Land Rover could hear the driver narrate and talk and communicate. But like microphones do, there were times that they would quit working. A cord might get broken, maybe some water got splashed on it, the microphone may have been banged too many times, or other things happen and they just don't work. So what do? Well, you have to learn to project in a case like that. You kind of drive half sideways and you're looking while you're driving, but you're also trying to talk sideways so the people in the back can hear you, and you have to be able to make sure they can still hear you because of safety reasons. If they can't hear you when something happens, you're in trouble. Now, anything more serious would happen to the Rover, and we would pull over to the side in the running area. Make sure that you're not in the way of other Rovers. Make sure that it's a clear signal that you're not working. And we did have radios that we could radio back into our managers into base and let them know, hey, I'm having this problem. Good example is when I hit the rock and I had to radio in and say, hey, I hit something on the course and I'm stopped here until we know that it's safe for me to proceed. It was very, very rare. I can count on one hand the number of times that I saw anybody have instances like this. If we had to hit the e-stop button on the water portion, which I did one time because I had a lady undo her seatbelt and tried to jump across, it wasn't an equipment failure, but it was still a time where we had to stop and radio in. So we had that option there where the radios were always on. We could radio in, say what's going on, what do we do? And we did actually have a full plan to evacuate the Land Rovers, whether out on the savannah where the animals were, which was something you really did not want to do, or on the water portion, which sadly we had more practice with that than we would have liked. But you did have plans in place for when things would go wrong that were kind of expected to go wrong. Now, working at Disney, it was much more dealing with our camera and our gear that we had. We had our Nikon cameras. They were connected to a PDA. For those of you who don't know what a PDA is, it's a personal data assistant. It really kind of predated the cell phones. Think everything your smartphone does, but it was actually a little mini computer that we would clip onto our belt and plug into our camera. So you would have all this equipment that you would use, and the pictures would be taken on the camera, transmitted to the PDA, information would be attached to them, so that way the location and the photographer and stuff like that could be found, and then it would be transmitted up to the wireless system and then made available. We would have technical issues. Equipment fails sometimes. The first thing that you would do as a photographer, if you were stepping up with a character, is you would step back. Let them know, kind of wave at the character, let them know, hey, my camera just quit for whatever reason, and you'd step away from where you were shooting. So if I was shooting like up here, I would kind of step back here and say, all right, I'm out, and make it a clear signal to the character as well as the guest that I was having an issue. If I was working on one of the main streets, or in front of Spaceship Earth, or on Hollywood Boulevard, I would actually step all the way out of the street to like stand next to a store while I tried to figure out what was going on, and if it was something that I could fix quickly on stage, or if it was something I was going to have to go back and get some help on. There were a number of different things that could happen. You could have batteries die. That was easy. We always carried spare batteries, and I could switch batteries out quickly. For the camera battery, it was a flip a door, let the old battery drop out, pop the new one in, close that door, and literally I could change that battery in about a second. Maybe 2 if I was moving slow, but it was quick. The flash batteries, we actually had 5 batteries to switch. 4 inside the flash, and then we had a special little add-on cover, so instead of the regular battery cover, it was actually another battery that would attach to it. So we would have 5 batteries, and again, I could switch all 5 of those out in about 2 seconds, because it's just a quick dump, throw them into a pocket, hopefully one where there's some insulation, because the used batteries were hot, and yes, we did have people get burns from dropping their hot batteries into a pocket with no insulation. Ugh. And then just immediately throw the new ones in, and then step right back up again and start shooting. That was the most common issue, that was the easiest issue. You would have other times, though, where the PDA may decide to quit working. It may freeze up, it may lock up, it may quit transmitting, and then you're stepping to the back and trying to figure out, okay, can I reset the PDA? Sometimes it was just simply what we would call a bump, where it was like a power off, but it wouldn't do a full restart. You just bump it off, give it a second or two, bump it back on again, and see if that would reset it. If that didn't reset it, then you may try rebooting it. You didn't really want to reboot it, though, because the way the PDAs worked, the pictures would be stored on the PDA before they would transmit. And if you rebooted it, you were likely to lose any pictures that were actually on that PDA. They would just disappear. So you didn't want to reboot at all. And there's various reasons the PDA may quit working. It may overheat. A lot of times what would happen was we just wouldn't get good wireless signal at the time. And then you watched all these pictures pile up on your PDA because you could see how many were pending to upload. You just kind of hoped that they would start uploading, or the wireless carrier would kick in or something. There were actually a few locations that we knew the wireless signal was bad. Just really bad, and it would make the pictures pile up, and if there were too many on there, they could actually cause the PDA to crash, and then you'd lose everything. So there were actually a few photo locations, especially if they were a busy one, where we would carry 2 PDAs, and if we saw the one start to get filled up, we would disconnect it, put it in a pocket, pull the other one out, plug it in, and go right back to shooting. That would allow the one to upload all those pictures while we were shooting on a different one, and it generally worked really well. But there were occasionally times when they just didn't, and then you'd have to find a way to let your management know so they could bring you another PDA and get them going. We actually had times when the wireless system in the parks would crash, and then no PDAs were uploading. At that point, you then had equipment people that would be running around to all the photo locations with all new PDAs, and we would switch them out, shoot for a little while they took all the full PDAs back to our base, plugged them in, uploaded them, and then repeated. And we would do that. Oh goodness, that was a pain. There were times that we would get actual equipment failures, though. I can remember one time I was shooting and my mirror in the camera went up and it just locked. Froze. Camera said, nope, I'm done. I've had enough. You would occasionally have equipment failures like that. You would have cameras that the moving pieces would just stop moving or they'd fall apart because we worked those cameras hard. And when that happened, you really didn't have much of a choice other than to step off, head back to base, or if you had somebody nearby and say, look, I'm done. If you were at a place where there was another photographer, you would let the other photographer know, hey, I've got to step off. My equipment just died on me. And if it was possible, the photographers would actually cover 2 spots. This was possible at Toontown and Character Spot in particular because sometimes the crowds would modulate, and if you were quick, not every photographer could do this, but you could get your posed pictures of one character, jump over, hit this other family with their character, then go back, and you could do it back and forth for a little while. We actually had some of us photographers that we could get into a rhythm. I can remember doing this with Jen and with Steve and a couple others at Toontown, where we would have 3 locations, and essentially what we would do is we would split to the outsides if we lost a photographer for some reason. We would tag both characters so that way they could be identified in our information, and we would bounce back and forth, and we would watch the other one so we could see who was doing what, and between the two of us we could cover all three spots and get everybody's photos. It was an exercise, you'd be tired, but they would cover that for all the guests until that other photographer got back again with fixed equipment. That was always fun. And there were times you would just have to make it up as you go. You might not get the candid photos, but if you could get the pose photos, you were doing all right. We got really good at learning to help each other out in a case like that. And we did have a couple people who knew more about cameras, and sometimes they could get the silly things working again, which was always nice. The train at Silver Dollar City, though, was a whole different group of issues. Again, we go back to the sound systems. The first year I worked on the train at Silver Dollar City, we had no sound system in the depot at all. So when you did your preloading spiel, you had to be loud. There was just no other way to do it. Because even if you had a group that was listening to you, there'd still be that person in the corner who was blah, 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 blah. I got a shotgun, I'm going to use it if you don't be quiet. The sound system in the station, and when we finally got it, was a huge help for that. Because otherwise we were depending upon our voice being loud enough to drown them out. And we did have a couple people that liked to compete. But even then, that sound system didn't always work. And the sound system outside at the robbery itself didn't always work. We would have issues with that where the sound just cut out, the microphones quit or whatever. And anytime you had that, you had to be able to be loud. I was actually kind of grateful for the theater I had done in college and high school, because you learn to project. You learn to be able to make yourself louder so that way people can hear you. And it came in especially handy in a case like that. Because we almost would have to go back to the old days when they didn't have sound systems at all, and then make sure that we were loud enough to be heard, not just in the back cars, but also in front where they had all the noise from the engine as it was steaming up as well. And that could be tough sometimes. You could definitely tell the difference when the sound system went out. But we would make it work. And then we'd get back into the cabin or back at the station, see if we couldn't fix if it was the microphone, maybe a battery had died, if the microphone itself had died, which we would usually keep 1 or 2 extra microphones around in a case like that. We had a very limited supply, so if you really lost the microphones and they were all dead, you were in trouble. Sometimes the batteries for the packs wouldn't recharge overnight, in which case then you're hoping they would get charged during the day and only do a show or two without them. You make it work. The bigger issue was if the sound system on the train itself didn't work. The conductors had a microphone that they would hold in the back of the train, and that's what they used to narrate and give safety spiels. It's also what they used to talk to the engineer many times. There is a radio there that you can use, but if you just had a quick thing to let them know, you would just use the microphone to talk to them. We actually had a switch that we could switch between the regular cars and the engine. But if that system wasn't working, if the switch quit, or if the microphone quit, or the microphone cord quit, which was the most common thing, you couldn't run the train because it was a safety thing as well. If you're not able to get information to the passengers or to the engineer, you can't operate the train. Most of the time, it was a simple switching the microphone cord. But not always. If somehow water had gotten in the system or a short had developed or something like that, we would take the time to try to fix it. We'd call in the sound technicians to try to fix it, and sometimes it meant just waiting until we could bring around the other train because it had been parked and not warmed up and not ready, and that was a pain. That was not what you wanted to do because it was a 2-hour delay to get that to happen. However, the most common issue that we had on the train was our guns. Actually, not even the guns. It was ammunition. We had a number of little plastic gunpowder charges that were the size of a bullet. We had a little sleeve that we put them in that was specially made for them, and that's how we fired the gun. You would only use one per show. So you had a sleeve, you put it into the sleeve before you ever went out, but you did not load that gun until a certain point just before it was fired. And what would happen sometimes is they wouldn't fire. You'd shoot the gun and it'd just go click. And our normal routine was you got 1 second shot. So you could cock the gun again, shoot again. If that didn't work, well, then you weren't going to shoot the gun because there could be something else going on and you did not want to risk safety. Actually, what happened at least as often was the fact that you'd get out there and you realize, oh man, I forgot to grab a sleeve. Because we would trade those off, again, kind of a safety feature. And if you forgot to pass it off sometimes, you'd get out there and you'd have a bullet and no way to load it. Gun ain't gonna work. In a case like that where the gun isn't firing right, the standard routine was for the conductor to yell bang really loud. Yes, it's cheap. Yes, it's chintzy. It's goofy. But that was part of the point. It fit in with the show, and it basically allowed the robbers to just have a field day at the conductor's expense. Especially if it was because the conductor had forgotten the part of the equipment they needed. And oh yes, as a conductor, you were definitely prepared to have them harangue you really good. Bang? What's that? Some kitty pop gun? Especially if you got a really bad charge occasionally that just didn't make any noise. You get a little pip. Huh? Yeah, they were going to harass you for that as well. That was the most common thing. Anything more serious than that, we generally would then call the engineers, because they were the actual mechanics on the train as well, and say, hey, we got this problem. Whether it meant walking up to the engine, whether it meant using the radio, or letting them know that, yeah, we got to deal with this. So that's kind of a little look at equipment failures and how we would deal with them at the different jobs. I'd love to hear your stories as well. Please don't forget to share them below. Let me know what you think. Give me a good thumbs up for a like, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you as well to my financial supporters, my YouTube members and patrons for the support. Y'all mean the world to me, and bless me so much. If you want to know more about that, or fan pages or more, check the description below. Thank you so very much for watching, and God bless. But you did have plans in place for main... So we'd have fat batteries? Yeah, we'd have fat... You don't want fat batteries. They're about to explode. If you'd like to know about my merchandise, contact information, fan pages, and more, be sure to check the description below. If you want to make sure you don't miss any of my videos, hit that button right there to subscribe. And if you want to see another one, well, I've got a great video for you right here. If you'd like to be like these wonderful people here too, and support me financially on Patreon or YouTube, well, hit that little button right there. It'll even give you behind the scenes access and more perks. Thank you so incredibly much for watching, and God bless.